partner tonight with iAsk and CAB to present this very important presentation. I hope that you found the Hidden in Plain Sight room informative. This room is designed to provide families with an eye to spot clues in a teenager's bedroom, where you might see and find clues to find out if children are experimenting with drugs, with alcohol use. Especially as vaping has been described as an epidemic, it's important that we're learning about what our children might be exposed to, and even more, that we as parents are having conversations with our children. Before I introduce Danielle Gamar, our Student Assistance Counselor, I wanted to thank all of you for taking the time to be here this evening. Our presenters this evening will be providing a lot of valuable information, and I hope that you'll find it helpful. The presentations tonight are being recorded, and so you will find them on the website. If you could, please share with families who couldn't be here this evening that this resource is available. Danielle Gamar is the Student Assistance Counselor at Irvington High School. She is a licensed clinical social worker and works with our students individually and in small groups. She's also a resource to our families, to you as parents. Throughout the year, Danielle also works closely with the Positive Impact Club at Irvington High School. For example, tomorrow is the Great American Smokeout, and students in the Positive Impact Club will be working with students throughout the whole high school, encouraging students to make a pledge to be vape and substance free. And now, without further ado, I would like to turn it over to Danielle, who is going to reveal some of the hidden in plain sight to us and share some additional important information. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello and welcome. Thank you for coming out. I'm Danielle Gamar, Student Assistance Counselor here at Irvington High School. So I'm going to spend some time sharing with you a little bit about why some of these items and some of these trends are important for you to know about and why they're problematic for our children. First, you may have seen the solo cup on the bookshelf over there, and it's so much in line with underage drinking and alcohol use and abuse. And alcohol remains one of the two most commonly used and abused substances by our young people. And its negative potential should not be underestimated, and the consequences that go along with it, poor decision making, sexual activity, car crashes, and also alcohol overdose that goes along with that as well. Often, young people are using alcohol in addition to marijuana at the same time, and which is a very particularly dangerous combination. Marijuana has, one of the effects of marijuana is that it suppresses the body's natural urge to vomit. And you know, typically when you drink too much, you vomit, almost a way to save your life. So when someone's using marijuana at the same time when they're drinking too much, it could be a dangerous combination. There's many different ways, as you saw in the display, that children can hide their alcohol use through brushes, through lotion dispensers, and there's a famous person posting on their Instagram page as well. I was walking through a store in the mall, and that was sitting on one of the counters. I was walking with my 13-year-old daughter as well. So, and they can obtain many of these things in either a vape shop or just they're available online through gift cards that they may receive, gifts for the holidays as well. Although a lot of these things, the hiding liquor, alcohol in these devices, surveys show that much of the alcohol that kids are obtaining, they're obtaining in their own homes from their liquor cabinet at home, that they know their parents don't regulate it very often, and they do just get it at home. So vape devices, we saw many of them here. They may be referred to as box mods, e-cigs, vapes, different ones. They're seeing the sticks more lately as well, which are disposable. That's here in the corner, and that's equal. One of those is equal to 1 pack of cigarettes, and they don't need to keep it around as they would with a Juul. This is a Juul starter pack, which would include the Juul itself, in addition to the cartridges and the charger. And it's important for us as parents to know the terminology that's used related to marijuana. 420, dabs, wax, and it can change the terminology even like depending on the town. It could vary. It's not likely that a student that youth would say to another, let's partake in some marijuana. It's more often weed, dabs, wax. We're hearing flour.
I heard new
more
one's
often.
also cart. They call cartridges carts.
Carts, yeah.
And that's what the marijuana is.
So, and blunts, which were more popular before vaping became much more commonplace. Blunts are becoming more widely used. And also highly concentrated marijuana. Street grade marijuana in the 90s was about 3-4% THC. THC is the chemical in marijuana that creates the high effect. 3 to 4%. Now street grade is closer to 15%. So 15, maybe 20% THC. These higher concentrated dabs or shatter is close. It could be closer to 90%, 65 to 90%. So if you can imagine THC levels in the 90s being 4% to 90%. So it's these the impact of the 3 to 4.
It's more like 15 to 20%?
That's street grade marijuana. Street grade marijuana, 3 to 4% in the 90s,
Okay.
and street grade marijuana now is about 15%, maybe 20%. But these highly concentrated dabs that they may use, as opposed to marijuana, or if they're using THC oil, could be between 65% and 90%. Yeah. So sometimes kids, they may be using marijuana leaves more often, either vaping oil or using these more highly concentrated ones. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
The highly concentrated waxes and oils
Yeah.
need to be put into a vape device. Like that's how they're taken in, right? Only through a vaping device or some sort of device that vaporizes the wax and
The oil and the dab or the wax, not necessarily through a vape device. It could be you could smoke it and burn it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when I'm just as a parent, it doesn't, my understanding, and could be totally wrong, is that the kids they don't smell as much of the typical weed smell when they utilize a vaping versus the traditional smoking of a joint.
That's correct.
Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what about, so that's the oil stuff, if they do, does that smell?
the THC oil,
Yeah, the
Um,
highly
it-
concentrated stuff.
it does not smell not like marijuana leaves do when you burn them. Yeah.
Unless it's flavored, so if you go on, you can Google mint THC oil, and then you will
Right.
smell mint.
And it's really the combustion process, so when you're smoking a traditional cigarette, or if it's marijuana that's in it, like in the ones that you mentioned, or a joint, the combustion process, so the combination of oxygen in the air that's actually causing it to be lit, is what produces the smoke and the smell. These vape pens or dabbing devices are using lower temperatures to heat the device, but not combust it, and so there's less smoke transmitted. And dabbing is a way of superheating the device, different than the vaporization process, but they're basically non-combustible ways of inhaling these toxins.
Right.
With the vaping device, you don't need a flame. You're heating it just with the battery inside the device. So, this also the Juul. If you have a Juul, they are selling Juul pods that also have THC oil in them. You can also inject many of the vaping devices with your own oil, including a THC oil as well. Vape pen with replaceable cartridges we saw as well, and you can use cartridges that have a number of substances. You don't always know what you're vaping. Of course, these products are not regulated, and someone could believe I'm having just THC, but you don't know really what it is. Grinder and dab mats, and these were also on display in the room, and this allows someone to grind off the resin from the marijuana leaves and obtain stronger THC levels from the rich kief part of the marijuana plant. So,
Wait, I'm sorry, I don't understand that. What is that?
So this is a grinder. They can, you're able to take, here's just quickly in here. You can put the leaf in here and kind of like
Grind it?
yeah, grind it up, and then it almost like kind of sifts down
Okay.
the stronger part of the stronger leaf.
Yeah,
The,
I get it.
kind of separates out the stronger part, so that when the part you may choose to smoke to burn the stronger part for a better high. Edibles. Often, my experience, this will kind of come in waves, so that edibles will become popular at different times. They're easy to hide, won't have a scent. They can become often very dangerous because kids won't be realize the fact that they may take some time to take effect. They'll eat some, won't realize, oh, I've already had a lot, and half an hour's gone by, I didn't feel anything. They take more and more. By the time they feel effect, they've taken a whole bunch, and then they become very sick. And so, not just saying this because I'm just a drug person, but this is from American College of Pediatrics, talks about marijuana being addictive, the adverse effects on the adolescent brain. You can see here, we've heard of, especially with these extremely high levels of THC, we're hearing reports of people having visits to the hospital with psychosis, extreme vomiting, and very negative effects from these extremely high THC levels. So what about CBD? It has a lot of people have been discussing. CBD is derived, if it's derived from the hemp plant, it is legal in New York, and there has been some evidence that it could have some therapeutic benefits. The problem is it is highly unregulated. So once again, like many of these things, you don't know when you're purchasing CBD if you really are receiving CBD. So it's really a risk anyone is taking. And if you're vaping CBD, you're having the same risks that you would be having if you're vaping any oil. So that's not a safe alternative. And you can see here as well, there have been cases of some negative ramifications from people who believed they were receiving CBD and it was not at all CBD.
Now, is that just in the states that is not legal? But this is legal.
Oh, no, yeah, even if where it is legal, it's
not
legal, but it's not
regulated.
regulated. Correct, it's not regulated, and there have been a lot of situations where it's been tested and it's not consistent as far as the amount of CBD that's in it. So it's really hard to tell, unfortunately. So anti-anxiety medication, we hear the kids using Xanax, and we know that there's a high number of our students who are experiencing anxiety that are under an immense amount of pressure and stress, and maybe receiving Xanax as being prescribed Xanax, and unfortunately some abusing it. So we had some examples of ways that some young people may hide some of their medication. But it's something to be certainly very diligent if your child is being prescribed that, and make sure that you're the person giving that medication. Opioids can often be prescribed for pain, and by a doctor. Always ask for if there is an alternative, if there's another option. They're so highly addictive, and it progresses when your body becomes addicted to it if taken as prescribed. And it's so imperative to ask your doctor if there is an alternative to these opioids and about how to wean yourself off it, because that's so many of the cases are where people are turning to heroin. Unfortunately, there's been, of course, you've heard on the news, the number of heroin overdoses that we've experienced in Westchester alone. So stimulants, if they're prescribed to someone correctly, it's helpful. If someone's taking Ritalin, Adderall, and it's not prescribed for them, it really is not something that's helpful. Other drugs that I think that we're not hearing of being abused so often, but I think warrants being mentioned because they are so dangerous. Cocaine, of course, heroin, inhalants, dextromethorphan, which is like cold medications, hallucinogens, LSD, ecstasy. Again, these aren't drugs that we're seeing very often, but they're definitely, like, they're out there. Kids are exposed to them.
And just to chime in again, I'm sorry, we had a LSD, well, we're waiting on the toxicology to come back. We had an LSD overdose 3 weeks ago in town, where a kid went to the hospital, 15-year-old kid. So it's here.
So that's so much that I wanted to keep on time. I don't know how we want to do with our time. We want to keep questions to the end, and
If you'd like.
move on. How do you want to do that?
We do want to keep your guys' time and mine. Thank you so much for coming out. I'm Lisa Tomini. I'm the coalition coordinator here in Irvington. I'm happy to announce that we've been awarded another 5-year block grant with the Drug Free Communities Grant, so we'll be continuing to do some great work in Irvington. And one of the things that we're looking to do is continue our speaker series from last year. We were in a little bit of a limbo with the grant, so now that we have a final decision, we're hoping to move forward quickly. This will kind of kickstart us, and we really wanted to kind of start this series with some important information on kind of what you as parents can be looking for, what the health implications of vaping are, which seems to be kind of the hot topic of the day. And with that, I'm going to introduce Dr. Amy Brown, who is a pediatric pulmonologist. No one has her hands on the pulse of what the vaping crisis is really all about right now. So without further ado, I will let her take over.
Thank you so much. And just remind me, what time, so I'm looking at time, so I know that I'm coming when we should go to it. Shoot for like 30 minutes. 30 minutes? Okay, great. Great. And I'm happy to be interactive and answer questions. So just to introduce myself again, so my name is Amy Brown. I'm a pediatric pulmonologist. I work locally, so I see patients in White Plains, and I take care of patients at Maria Ferrari Children's Hospital. Our group is Boston Children's Health Physicians here, not in Boston. And then I also am very involved through grant funds through New York State in the Children's Environmental Health Network. So that's 7 different centers, of which there's one in Hudson Valley that I'm very active and we have grant funding for. So I'm going to talk a lot about just vaping and e-cigarettes. I am going to talk about the nicotine component. I'll talk about the marijuana component as well. But a lot of what I want to do is set the stage for why this is so important. I'm hopeful that you leave here and you tell everyone you know what an epidemic this is and how important it is that we all advocate for changes in legislation and regulations for these devices because of what's going on with our youth and young adults. So just to start out, so why is it important that we as a community discuss this tonight? Well, in 2018, there's a great quote by the former FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb, who said that we have an obligation, so we, all of us sitting in this room, and the communities at large, to act on what we know. What we know is very disturbing. Kids' use of e-cigarettes has reached an epidemic level of growth, and I'm going to show you a few graphical ways and some numerical ways of why that's true. So if you look at this diagram over here, and I don't have a pointer, okay. So basically with the solid line, you're seeing any tobacco product high school use. And you're seeing that when you look from this started to come down, but with e-cigarettes, and we'll talk about popular brands like Juul when they came on the market, we see that from 2017, to 2018, that jumped up. And that trend mirrors e-cigarette use in high school, and it's mirroring tobacco product use in middle school as well. Shown another way, this is results from the National Youth Tobacco Survey. You can see that we've done great progress when we think about the forward direction that we've done with cigarettes in the past 10 years. We are seeing over our lifetime that cigarette use by youth and young adults is dramatically reducing. However, tobacco use remains the same, and that's because of e-cigarettes and these climbing numbers that are right here. So what do these numbers mean? So this is an infographic from the CDC of who's using and what are those numbers. So this is as of 2018, but there's about 3.6 million U.S. middle and high school students who are reporting that in the past 30 days at the time of the survey that they ever used e-cigarettes. So what does that translate to of percentages? So 1 in 20 middle school students are using e-cigarettes, or about 5%. How about high school students? So 20%, 1 in 5 high school students are reporting the use, and that's a jump up of about 78% from 2017 to 2018, making it a very, very concerning epidemic. So I just think if you think about a high school classroom, and high school classroom size is about 25 students, so 1 in 5. So in every high school classroom, we could assume that there's about 5 kids who have used in the past 30 days some sort of e-cigarette product. And that's not talking about the children who were using other types of substances and what type of substance that that is in the product. So a few things that I'm going to go through tonight, and I may speed through some things just in the interest of time, and again, I'm happy to make this interactive and have it be discussion based. So first thing I want to do is just a vaping 101. We'll talk about the basics. In the literature, a lot of times you'll hear these called ENDS, or electronic nicotine delivery systems. And just so we're all on the same page, I'm talking about delivery systems that are also capable of delivering marijuana as well. But again, in the literature, when you're looking at the evidence, ENDS is what comes up as a commonly used term. We'll discuss the known and potential risks of these e-cigarettes, vape devices, and pod systems. We'll talk about the marketing and regulatory practices for these products. We'll learn about how do healthcare teams and support teams screen and counsel youth and families, and we'll identify some resources to help our youth understand the risks that we're seeing. Okay. So electronic nicotine delivery systems, as I mentioned, ENDS, or vaping in general, is the use of a battery-operated device that heats, so heat, not burn, so no combustion takes place, a liquid that usually contains nicotine, however we talked about it contain other substances, producing an aerosol that the user inhales. And we're going to spend a lot of time talking about this infographic of what the different substances are in that aerosol. When you define an aerosol is a suspension of fine particles in the air. And those fine particles can reach deep down into your lungs, and we'll talk about the health effects that can happen. So e-cigarettes are not new. They didn't come on the market in 2017 and boom, there's a problem. E-cigarettes have been around for a while. They were first developed and available in China in 2003, and then in U.S. European markets in 2006. And what's very interesting, and probably the single most important reason for the epidemic, is that they entered the U.S. market as a consumer product without government regulation. So the government is very strictly regulated tobacco use in cigarettes. But cigars, hookahs, other tobacco products were not regulated the same way. E-cigarettes came on the market under the cigar hookah product, and they've been widely available for use and not regulated. We'll talk about the legislation that has taken place to move forward, but that's probably the single loophole of why we're seeing this epidemic level. Another reason is also because they're widely available. And some regulations have been put in place, but you can purchase them online. You can get them in traditional retail outlets. You know, it's been a short period of time, but they just banned from them being sold in vending machines, which has long been banned for cigarettes. So readily available, no regulation, vulnerable teenagers. So it's really been a setup for an epidemic that we're seeing. So what do we call these devices? So e-cigs, cig-a-likes, and I know Danielle had gone through a lot of this. Vape pens, vapes, mods, mod pods. IQOS is a really sleek device that hasn't come into the U.S. market yet, but it stands for I Quit Ordinary Smoking devices, Juuls, there's the new Stigs, there's all different names. And if you ask a kid, because as many of you know, kids are very concrete, if you say, do you smoke? They say no. If you say, do you vape? They say no. If you say, do you Juul? Then all of a sudden you get this smirk on their face that they know what you're talking about. So kids associate the terminology they use with the action that they're doing. So knowing the terms is really important because that is also a way to engage kids in talking about these products. So how they work? So there's a ton of different brands on the market. They generally have 4 common components. There's a cartridge that contains the liquid. There's an atomizer, which is a vaporization chamber that heats the element, and there's a battery. And we'll talk about safety, but batteries can cause explosions. Batteries can be swallowed by young children and taken out of the devices. So this is not a benign device for many reasons, but that's something that's also underscored is just the safety concerns of these devices. So essentially what happens is the user activates the product by inhaling or pressing the button. It's heated up, that liquid is aerosolized, and then that creates a vapor and emulates the action of tobacco. Well, it produces the tobacco smoke and emulates the smoking action by the user. But the key is no combustion occurs. And combustion is just a fancy chemical word for the combination of oxygen with a product to produce the smoke. So there's all different types, and they've gotten more sophisticated. If you look on the screen going down, you can see the first generations that are over here. They weren't that sophisticated. They kind of looked like cigarettes, and they were really heavy in nature. Then they were only for single use. Then they got a lot more sophisticated to the types where you can refill with the cartridges. And then down here is a jewel pen that Danielle also showed pictures of. You can see it looks very much like a USB drive. A lot of times you can't, there are tons and tons of stories of students who carried it around like a USB drive, and that's what it was, thought to be. This is a picture of the IQOS device that's supposed to look, the charging pack looks like an iPhone, and then the pen part looks like a stylus. So really meant to be discreet and sleek. And so there's just been an evolution. So the first generation, second generation, third, and we're really onto more of a fourth generation that we're seeing. And so I'll talk about health effects, but why it's so hard to really understand the health effects is because there's a lack of uniformity in these devices, right? So, and we'll talk about the user, the technique that the user employs, so different ways of actually inhaling the vapor, and there can be that can lead to different particle size. The way that your lungs filter out toxins from the air, so any smoke that comes in is based on particle size, so larger particles don't go as far as smaller particles, but you can actually create different inhalation techniques to maximize deposition in the respiratory tract. Maximizing deposition can increase the rewarding effects of drug delivery, meaning that more can be absorbed, but it can also enhance the delivery of more toxins. And it's scary because you can go on YouTube and you can download or watch as many videos as you want of how to maximize your hit from X, Y, and Z device. So these are things that via the internet can be readily shared and kids can find. So I see a lot of distress. This is meant to be eye-opening, but I know it's also quite distressing. So another reason why it's hard to really understand the health effects is because vaping is not just one thing. There's, as I was mentioning earlier, there's a lot of vaping-associated behaviors. So what we're seeing is a lot of what's called hacking or modifying the device. So for example, Juul makes the device, but as we talked about, you can inject into the Juul cartridge other oils. You can buy non-Juul but THC pods. So these devices are being able to be modified in different ways not intended by the manufacturer. So some of the ways are the refilling single-use cartridges or dripping, so you're dropping the liquid directly onto the heating oil, again, not using the consolidated device or the pod. And then dabbing, as again Danielle talked about, is that superheating of substances containing high, almost 90% THC and other cannabinoids, and it's this wax that's formed. So imagine what that's doing when that gets down to your lungs, that they're smoking this wax. So they get the THC component, but they get a lot of other concerning chemicals as well. So our body, and I'm going to talk about this in just a second, but kind of a digression. Our body is exposed to a lot of environmental chemicals and adverse exposures all the time. We're exposed via our skin through absorption, and people think about the skincare products that they put on and how that's going to have effect on their health. We're exposed via ingestion and through our GI tract. And ingestion is one way, so we think of anything that we're drinking. So alcohol, you can get the drug effect from drinking alcohol. You can also get other absorption of other drugs by drinking or any drug that you use. But your GI tract has a very thick barrier and has an innate immune system there that's used to kind of like the part of the body that can take on harder substances and detoxify much more quickly. Your lungs, the third route of exposure or inhalation, does not have that benefit. So using these devices repeatedly to an organ that is not meant to detoxify at the same degree that your skin or your GI tract can is very, very scary. So I already mentioned a few of these the top bullet point, but what I wanted to talk about is what are these liquid components? So can we break it down and talk about why, what's exactly in these liquids? So the first thing is the carrier solution. So again, the drug of interest is usually why the user is using it, so the nicotine or the THC. But the carrier solution is what gels everything together, gives it that humectant properties. It also provides a throat hit sensation of smoking. And so for a lot of former smokers who made the switch, which is Juul's marketing technique, they still want to get that throat hit, and that's what a lot of people crave also, because that's their smoking experience. And so the amount of what usually their propylene glycol, vegetable glycerin, or glycerol can produce that similar effect to smoking. Now, all three of those chemicals, propylene glycol, vegetable glycerin, or glycerol, are safe for oral consumption, so your GI tract can handle them, but we don't know if your lungs can, and we don't know the long-term effects of inhaling those type of compounds. I'll also bring up that glycerol is a fatty substance and capable of dissolving fat-soluble vitamins such as the vitamin E. So when we'll talk about the vitamin E story, having these carrier solutions allows for these chemicals to be dissolved in there that can also exert harmful effects. So it's very multifactorial. We'll spend a lot of time in the next few slides talking about flavoring. There are over 7,000 flavorings available. We'll talk about why it's an attractant for youth. But what's important to know about flavoring is that it's also a very complex story, and it's multiple chemicals that are mixed together to create the flavoring. And then something people don't think about is this is a metal device. So when they looked at both fluid from the lungs and also particulate matter after a smoking session, metals like tin, lead, nickel, chromium, manganese, arsenic are found in the liquids and vapors. So a lot of scary things, and this is just the first slide. So I'll keep going. So we're gonna, there's a lot of shocked faces, and again, this is meant to be eye-opening. This is meant to be that we need to do something because this is really a community-level problem, and that's why we're all here tonight. So the nicotine component. So some pods are quote-unquote nicotine-free, but there's no quality control testing for that, or they can be as high as 59 milligrams per ml, which is about 5.9%. And just to kind of give you an idea, so a cigarette, like a pack of Marlboro Reds, it would be like 36 milligrams. Some ultralights might be about 8 milligrams. So some numbers for you to just kind of crunch are that a Juul pod is about 0.7 mLs, and in each pod has about 35 milligrams. So it's closer to like the 59, like having Marlboro Reds. And one thing about Juul that's also very interesting and different than conventional cigarettes is that it utilizes nicotine salts. And I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with this as to why it's not just a traditional amount of tobacco. So using nicotine salts allows for more free tobacco. And what that means is most of the time tobacco or nicotine is found in the base form, right? And it's hard for it to cross the blood-brain barrier because acids, when they're in the bloodstream, much more easily cross the bloodstream barrier to produce their effects. Bases do not, and that's usually how nicotine is found in conventional cigarettes. But when you make it into an acid, so you add a protonated compound, a benzoic acid, creating a nicotine salt, nicotine can then, at a higher concentration, cross over to the blood-brain barrier and then have more or more effects on the brain, and we're going to talk a lot about the implications on the developing brain. But so you can get a higher concentration and you can get a more bioactive amount delivered to the brain. So very, very concerning for the Juul product in particular, but not to discount all the other products that are out there. And then obviously, as I mentioned, other components, the THC or other illicit substances. So I mentioned that there was a wide variation in nicotine concentration, and studies actually show that when they tested it, it said it was 59 milligrams per ml, but it was a different number. So it's not a regulated product, and you don't know how much you're truly getting. And when it says that there's no nicotine, there could be nicotine. So the flavoring. So the flavorings are of concern, and this has been a really hot topic, especially in the past few months, in thinking about legislation, and there's been a few new studies that have come out to prove what we already know. So flavorings promote initiation by both youth and young adults, and the flavorings also support continuation. So we don't want our kids to start, but if they do start, we don't want them to continue. And flavorings support both the initiation and the continuation, as looked at in studies. Flavorings also often labeled as food grade, so it's fine because this is food grade. But food grade can imply that it's safe for oral ingestion, so our tough stomach barrier can handle it. But how do we know that it's safe for inhalation? But by labeling as that, it changes the perception that this is actually a product that's safe for use, although that couldn't be further from the truth. The additives, so the carrier compounds that I was talking about, like the propylene glycol, they can form volatile organic compounds, or sometimes called VOCs. We all try to limit them, so if you're painting your house, you don't want to be around them because it emits VOCs. That can have health effects. And the main health effect of VOCs is that of being a carcinogen. And e-cigs produce tons of VOCs. So formaldehyde, acetaldehyde, acrolein, and they're produced by these EMDS solutions, especially the carrier compounds. So the last piece that I wanted to make sure I mentioned was just that the storage of the e-liquids is now mandated to be in a child-safe container. But something that was a concern for younger siblings of users was that there was a new upstroke in 2012 to then 2015 when it was came into legislation of acute nicotinic intoxication, which we hadn't seen because it would be very hard to chew tobacco leaves to the level that these children, young children, because they were drinking the pods and they had the flavoring taste and they were able to easily access these pods and open them up. And so young children were going into the emergency room with acute nicotinic intoxication. So that's been now mandated that they have to be in a child-safe container. But again, thinking about the loopholes, and it took a lot of cases for that to come into legislation. Okay, I have a lot of stuff, so I can keep going, but any questions? Or you want me to just keep going and then interrupt me? Okay. So I wanted to just tell you an evidence-based overview of some of the health effects now that you have a baseline understanding of what are the chemicals. So we really don't have great observational data on the long-term health effects. So what happens 20 years from now? We'll probably start to know in the next 10 years, but should we wait and not do anything until we have that information? The initial body of evidence that came out, and this is an adult, is that e-cigarettes poses fewer health risks than traditional cigarettes. And this is mainly studied cardiovascular studies and COPD studies. But it's now being challenged by new and emerging studies. And we can talk about, if we have time at the end, some of the difference between the analysis of studies based on European regulation bodies and the FDA in the United States, because there's actually quite a difference when you think about how the studies have been interpreted and what the evidence base is guiding as far as legislation. And the main thing is that it's important that we not extrapolate the adult studies of we don't know and maybe it's safer to children, because that's what's leading to the public health crisis currently. So what do we know about nicotine? So nicotine, similar to conventional smoking, can have a variety of physiologic effects. And even if you wanted to, in a pure system, take away the cigarette piece, we know with nicotine gum, nicotine patches, there are ways to study, well, what are the effects of just nicotine on the body without the smoking of cigarettes? And actually, you can measure nicotine. So we do studies like this all the time in my group, where we look at something called urine or in the blood, so a serum marker of cotinine. So when you're exposed to nicotine, a breakdown product in your blood is something called cotinine. So if I have a parent who says, I don't smoke, only I can smell it, or, but I want to test the kid's level, I can actually just send a blood cotinine level and see if they've been exposed. And we do a lot of secondhand smoke exposure studies with kids, measuring urine and or blood cotinine. So there's a blood level, so it's in your serum, and it depends on the nicotine concentration, the type of e-liquid, as I mentioned, whether it's a nicotine salt or not, the user experience, so you can get differing amounts of nicotine in your bloodstream based on how you're inhaling, how far it's getting into the lungs, and you can maximize absorption the smaller the particles are. The puffing intensity, device characteristics, and the technique. And I mentioned the part about what are the nicotine health effects. So we're here because we're talking about youth and young adults, and one of the most paramount and important to discuss health effects is nicotine addiction. That's what we're trying to prevent, because then all the other health effects come later. So we don't want them to get addicted, and we don't want to harm their developing brain. So the adolescent brain is uniquely vulnerable to the rewarding effects of nicotine. And adolescents, as compared with adult counterparts, are more sensitive to the rewarding properties. And I tell parents that kids are just more dramatic about everything. They experience high highs and low lows, and that's what nicotine gives them. So if you have a 27-year-old who tries nicotine for the same time, they're just not going to have that same dramatic effect because their brain is wired differently. But as the brain's maturing, that's how teenagers experience life, and so giving them nicotine, the high that they experience from nicotine will be that much more dramatic.
And then the withdrawal symptoms and the craving for the next hit, the waking up in the middle of the night to use your Juul pen, is a very real thing because their withdrawal is so much stronger in the teenage years. So, you know, the numbers are that 9 out of 10 adult smokers began their habit in adolescence. So we need to prevent nicotine addiction. That's the way to solve the problem. And so this is a critical time for counseling on all types of nicotine exposure, but in particular what we're seeing with the electronic nicotine exposure. And youth are the target market. If you read some of the reports from the tobacco companies, they're learners. That's what they call them. It's really scary to think that your child is the tobacco company's learners. That's who they're studying in the market. That's who they're targeting. They might say that they're not to the public, but behind the scenes, and if you read any of their transcripts, kids are their target. Because 9 out of 10 of them are the ones who keep going out to use cigarettes. Once you use nicotine, you're more likely to use other drugs, and that's been shown in animal models, independent of whether it's cigarettes or conventional or electronic cigarettes. Nicotine can have extensive neurocognitive impacts, mainly with attention, impulse control, other mood disorders. And nicotine by itself is not carcinogenic. So nicotine doesn't cause cancer, as far as we know, but several of the other compounds do. So in combination with that, nicotine is what we call oncogenic, meaning it promotes tumor growth and metastasis. So if you have an oncogenic compound and a carcinogenic compound, it's kind of like this bad combination for cancer promotion. And again, I mentioned non-nicotine products. So we say, okay, well then don't just use the nicotine, but we're still being exposed to very concerning compounds. So what about some of the effects of marijuana? This is just an infographic to tell you that marijuana affects all parts of the brain. So it can impair appetite. It's actually used for chemotherapy to suppress the vomiting reflex that occurs, but it can have applications for appetite or implications, judgment, movement. There can be a lot of dyskinesias. That's what we're seeing in our emergency room, is what's called ataxia or dyskinesias of these abnormal movements, and they can occur with acute intoxication, but because of the super high concentrations that they're getting, kids are presenting with movement disorders that are typically reserved for, you know, later in life in the 5th or 6th decade. Kids are presenting with movement disorders because of this chronic THC use. It can create more fear and anxiety, so we're seeing a lot of mood disorders as well. And again, intensifying that reward and pleasure that we know that the teenage brain is so vulnerable to. So a variety of effects that are not intended by the user for, or some of them may be intended with the acute high, but they can have long-term chronic effects. I mentioned VOCs before. So these come up when the compounds are heated. There's multiple types of them. We've known for a while that exposure to even a low level of VOCs has been exposed with increased lifetime cancer risk. And there's actually been specific studies. So one of the landmark studies, there's a group out in San Francisco, ironically, where Juul headquarters are, that's Mark Rubenstein, who does a lot of work. He has a lot of funding for what's called the teen vaping study. And he's tested teens extensively, and one of his more recent papers has showed that the users of e-cigarettes have these metabolites in their urine. So there's measurable levels in their bloodstream, and then it's being excreted in their urine of these VOCs. So the flavorings, and we're just going to come back to this. Again, a lot of this is not certain, but I'll tell you what we do know. Something to think about is allergies. So flavorings can actually induce an allergen response, and there's case reports about mint in particular, which was one of the most common flavors of producing an allergen response. Fruit flavored products have a high level of a class 2B carcinogen acrylonitrile. Cherry cigarettes tend to contain a lot of benzaldehyde. That's a respiratory irritant. And then something that's so concerning to me is another compound called diacetyl, which is very, very commonly used in flavored e-cigarettes. And I don't know if anyone's here has ever heard of popcorn workers' lung. It was described about 30 years ago, 25 to 30 years ago, and it was seen in a microwave popcorn factory where the workers who were packaging up the popcorn, because they were adding the butter flavor, but some of it was aerosolized, as a lot of compounds are. And then there was this epidemic of workers who developed something called bronchiolitis obliterans,
which is it's obliterative lung disease. And they found that it was due to the exposure to diacetyl. And something that's concerning is that the National Institute for Occupational Health actually has workplace standards of what in a room the ambient concentration of diacetyl can be. Yet an individual user can repeatedly inhale diacetyl and there's no personal standards of what that should be. So this gets at the heart of when we presented, both Ellen, who will speak for myself, have been at some of these meetings, and we talk about the flavorings, because a lot of the legislation where we wanted to lead is about the flavorings. So again, it's hard to, and as you'll see, exactly pinpoint what is causing the effect, but it could be from anything, and there's a lot of really harmful effects that we're worried about. So let's put it together. So what does it do to the respiratory system? So I've talked about how the particle concentration, the size, can affect the distribution and deposition pattern in the lungs. And it's pretty similar to conventional cigarettes. The particles from e-cigarettes can get pretty far down in the lungs. So what am I seeing now? Kids coming in with a chronic cough. They have phlegm. If they have asthma, it exacerbates their underlying asthma. And then the physicians diagnose them with bronchitis, bronchiolitis all the time. So these are otherwise healthy kids who have now induced a medical condition. They're missing school because of it, and they may be getting treatment. A lot of times kids, when they have coming to me, they've had like 4 courses of antibiotics for bronchitis, and their vaping use wasn't addressed. So they're getting antibiotics, but a lot of it is now thinking about how do we take away the offender, and obviously we can't go back in time, but thinking through as providers and as parents, how can we address this? How can we recognize this and address this? So we also see that there is increased airway inflammation. This is one of the studies that's not invasive. It's called the fraction of exhaled nitric oxide. Tells us how much inflammation is in your lungs, and that's been studied. And we do something in our office called pulmonary function test, which is just a non-invasive way to measure whether the airways are open or obstructed. And one of the studies that was just published in early 2019, which was done in Florida, showed that after e-cigarette use, when kids, so this is in children, did the breathing test compared to their baseline, e-cigarette use caused functional obstruction, so they had a decline in their lung function immediately, 30 minutes after use, and worsened pulmonary function for a prolonged period of time in children who have asthma. So it's affecting their pulmonary health for sure. And in contrast to conventional cigarettes, what about secondary exposure, so secondhand smoke? So when I have a young kid and I ask the parent if they vape, and they say yes, I obviously don't want them exposed to the conventional cigarettes. I don't really want them exposed to the vaping. Is it better or worse if there's secondhand exposure? And the answer is we don't really know, but there has been studies that have shown, so it may be less harmful, but I never say that, because saying that implies that it's safe. So we just say it's not safe at all. But there have been studies that show, so they've looked at particulate matter on surfaces after a smoking session, and that the particulate matter that is seen is components from the e-cigarette. So there's got to be some sort of secondary or secondhand exposure. We just don't know how that translates to health. So the message is that it's not safe. I never say it's less harmful, because they mean 2 totally different things. So I have about 5 more minutes. I won't be able to get through all of the slides, but I just want to talk about the recent epidemic also, and talk about some of the health effects. So over here you see like a meme about vaping and these cool pictures that are been in the media and circulate on kids' social media. And this is what we're seeing now, right? So we're seeing kids who are on ventilators and who are sick from vaping. I just want to take you through some of the numbers. God bless you. So since July, this is when it all started, the CDC is monitoring an epidemic of severe lung disease, and the term that they're using is e-volley. So e-cigarette and vaping products with associated lung injury. God bless you. To date, so this is as of November 19th, so I got this last night, there have been 2,172 cases reported to the CDC, resulting in 42 deaths. So that's 1.7%. So all of these cases could have been prevented, right? God bless you. And any disease that has a mortality of 2% is a serious, serious disease. I mean, any disease that has any mortality, but this is very, very concerning numbers. And I put up some of the tables, I know you can't see them as well, just to tell you about some of the demographics, but if you jump to the age group, you can see that our teens are being affected. So this is not just people who have had a lifelong habit and they have a chronic disease on top of it. This is otherwise healthy teens. And I personally myself have seen the otherwise healthy teens who come in and are on all different levels of life support with diseases that are with a very, very high mortality from vaping-associated lung injury. So the definition, there's a confirmed cases and a probable definition, and I bring this up just to let you know that there's just a few requirements. So use of the vaping device within 90 days of symptoms. You have to have some sort of change on your imaging, and I'll show you a few images next, but change on your chest x-ray, or you can have a CT. But you have to have the absence of an infectious etiology for the confirmed cases, or for the probable cases, you can have an infectious etiology, but it has to be out of proportion. So someone who comes in from a viral infection but ends up with something called acute respiratory distress syndrome, who has this vaping history, can also be classified there. But that's really what, there's been a lot of information and seminars with the New York State Department of Health that I've participated in both giving and being a part of, so that physicians can correctly identify this and report the cases so that we can inform the exposures. So these are some of the x-rays. I know they're all abnormal. These don't look good. So the top one over here is a CT scan. They should all be lung here and look similar to what you see up here. This is not. This is all just material and debris of inflammation and infection. Same thing here. You're seeing just these fluffy infiltrates on both sides of the lungs, as well as here, where you should see more of like this black appearance that you see in the higher part, and here as well. So there is inflammation that's happening, and it can be missed on stethoscope. So that's another thing, is a lot of times the lungs sound clear, but they have symptoms. So going to the x-ray and correlating the symptoms. All of these patients had, most of them, what's interesting is, at the time of presentation when they were reported, had about 85% had respiratory symptoms. About half of them had GI symptoms. So something that was interesting in our collaborators at Sinai, they had a patient who was on the GI service who came in with like malaise and not feeling well and vomiting. And then 3 days later, she developed the respiratory symptoms, and they did an x-ray, and she had a confirmed diagnosis of EVALI. So it's any sort of systemic, meaning like just not feeling well, GI symptoms and or respiratory symptoms associated with vaping that can be reported. So why is it so hard to understand EVALI? And this infographic up here tells us, so what do? So we take any data we have, any pathology, any clinical data, and then product use. So one thing that was really hard is I would have to counsel patients who were very worried that there would be punitive effects. Because I said, I really need you to go home and get all your products. You know, we're reporting this to the state, we're not reporting this to the police. This is not, but the way you can help us and the public understand this disease is that we need to take your devices, and that's how we're learning about this, and we need to test them. And there's been a lot of hesitancy about THC and if their child would get in trouble, but the truth is it's not meant to be punitive, it's really meant to inform the public health crisis. But so that's what we do, and that's what we've been doing at the bedside. And then we send off that information to New York State. They have a laboratory and they do testing, and that informs the patient exposure. So one of the most recent things that everyone's talking about is vitamin E. And this is from the most recent report that was just published yesterday, is that and this was kind of leaked before, it came out before, but it's unclear. So, well, let me just read what it says. So recent CDC laboratory testing has detected vitamin E acetate in bronchoalveolar lavage fluid. So that's something, it's a sample. Pulmonologists like myself do that, where we go similar to an endoscopy, where you go into the stomach, it's a bronchoscopy, you go into the lungs, you collect a sample, and you send back, you take out the fluid, and then you can send it for further testing. So what they looked at was a convenience sample. So that's why I want to explain that it's more complicated than just, yep, it's vitamin E. So they had 29 samples, and they tested 29 samples, but there's been over 2,000 cases. So of the samples that were tested, they had this, and that's why they're reporting that there's this concordance in exposure and disease, but it's only from a sample of 29 patients. So they're providing direct evidence that it's present in the lungs, in those who have the injury. But we don't have sufficient evidence to say that's all it is and get the vitamin E out and everything will be fine. So there's not sufficient evidence to rule out other chemicals of potential concern that are related to EVALI. And overall, the take home is that there's many different substances and product sources that they're investigating as there may be more than one cause of this outbreak. So we think of evolving E. coli. And really the true cause is not yet known and most likely very multifactorial. I am just at 8 o'clock, so to be mindful of Ellen's time, I'll just take like one more minute. For marketing and regulation, obviously youth are this source of marketing, and there's been a lot happening, especially in the county, in New York State, and there's been some progress. So I was a part of the Yonkers flavor ban, and back in September, in Yonkers, they had an open town hall meeting, and they voted 7-0 to ban the sale of flavored vape products in Yonkers. That then was pushed, so New York State has been talking about this also, and it's held up in court and has not yet gone through. In Westchester County, both Ellen and myself were present for many Board of Legislators meetings to advocate, or as I was saying earlier, children are 20% of the population and 0% of the vote. So that's why we go. We represent the children who need this voice to be heard. And the Westchester County Board of Legislators is thinking about this. They were going to vote on it on Monday night, and then it got pushed back to January. So it's definitely something we're advocating for. So flavoring and banning the flavors may help. As I talked about, there's enough data to suggest that the initiation and continuation is a component that's due to flavoring. Marketing regulations are also necessary. Is it useful for smoking cessation? So all those smokers who say that they need their vapes because it helped them quit smoking. So in the US, different than Europe, it is not an FDA-approved method of ceasing tobacco smoke from conventional cigarettes. There are FDA-approved and well-studied ways, including, and there's a whole stepwise program, and I provide counseling at my office, but using nicotine gum, nicotine patch, you basically assess the impairment, and then you provide controller medications to help get them through that. But it is not an approved device for smoking cessation. It is just an alternate. And that is, as most recently, by the FDA. So anyway, my little graphic. Screening and counseling, again, there's a lot of recommendations. These are things to talk about, and Ellen, you may even touch on this as well, and we can always talk about this afterwards. There's a lot of recommendations from different academic societies that we follow. One thing that came up at the most recent meeting that we had a few weeks ago when we're talking about the survey results was, when do you start to talk to your kid about tobacco use? And actually, as per the AAP, that's the American Academy of Pediatrics, policy statement, really, the recommendations are you should screen from infancy if there's any exposure in the home. But at age 5, kids are talking about these things and they want to know, is it safe, is it not? And so bringing it up can start very young. You don't have to wait until they're in middle school. You can start in the youngest of children. And it's just doing it correctly. So it's having the hand-holding of a healthcare provider or a trusted counselor to be able to do this. So with that, as I mentioned, we're the New York State Children's Environmental Health Center, and I'm very active and a part of throughout the state. Some of my concluding messages, just hopefully you'll take home that this is scary, and it takes a village, and it's our voices, and it's our desire to help our children and our children's children and really make a difference and making a difference today. And fighting against tobacco. Big tobacco, or local vape shops. To me, they're all one and the same because they have the same mission, and our mission is to work against them. So thank you. Another place to just know about is the Surgeon General's website has a great campaign, and for parents, they have great talking tips. It's one of my favorite websites and go-tos. The Julius Richmond Center of Excellence is part of the AAP Academy, or the Academy of Pediatrics. They have great resources, and they also generously provide a lot of the content. These are my original slides, but they provide a lot of content for these presentations that we get. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amy. And that was a great segue to introduce Ellen Morehouse. We're very fortunate to have Ellen with us. Ellen is the Executive Director of Student Assistance Services, who has placed counselors such as Danielle throughout Westchester. It's one of the oldest and longest standing programs nationwide, and was a model really for providing support for students within the buildings themselves. So Ellen is going to share with us, after that scary presentation, how we can begin thinking about supporting our students and really having conversations that are meaningful, because I think that the reality of the situation really is that they're not aware of exactly how dangerous this can be. So I will let Ellen go ahead and take it away.
And I'm going to give you some specific strategies of things that you can do tonight, tomorrow morning, that you can tell your friends. I just want to get a sense, how many of you have high school age children? And how many of you have middle school age? Elementary? Okay, so I'm going to focus on middle school and high school. I have some slides. If you do it by date, modified. And it's Irvington parent presentation. Great, that's it. Thank you. There we go. Okay, so, and, okay, so the bottom line is that your teenagers need you as much now as when they were little when it comes to substance abuse prevention. And then when I say substance abuse prevention, I'm including vaping. So just for example, as parents, how many of you can remember when your child was an infant or a toddler, you maybe had to set the alarm at 2 in the morning to wake up and make sure you gave them their dose of antibiotic, or vape, a healthy vaporizer, for something, or put them in the shower, or do something. You all remember that. Well, when they're teenagers, you have to do almost the same thing. You have to be up when they come home. So if their curfew is 11 or 12 or 1, and you've been up since 6 in the morning, and it's Friday, and you are exhausted, absolutely fine. Go to bed at 9 o'clock at night, but if their curfew is 11, set your alarm for 11:15 so you can be up when they come home, so you can see what kind of shape they're in. You can have a conversation. Just by them knowing that you are going to be up when they come home provides some protection, because they know you're going to see them and know what condition they're in. So just make that a part of what you do. Always be up. Know what time you expect them home, or even if you take an afternoon nap, if they're supposed to come home at a certain time, set that alarm so you're up when they come home. Okay. You can be the perfect parent, if there is such a thing, and do absolutely everything right, and your child can still grow up to have a problem because of risk factors outside of your family. Obviously, their friends, the school, the community, the state, and the country really make a difference. So just for example, teenagers that are living in states that have legalized marijuana for non-medical purposes have much higher rates of marijuana use than states that haven't legalized. So that's just an example of how other factors can make a difference. But tonight, we're going to focus on what you can do as a family. So I wanted to just show you this slide to show you that parents really can make a difference. Again, there's no guarantee, and we all know somebody, hopefully it's not someone close to us, who lived a really healthy lifestyle, didn't smoke cigarettes, wasn't overweight, exercised regularly, and still had heart disease or still had cancer. So genetics and environmental factors can make a difference, but certainly parents can reduce whether their child winds up using something. And you see, when parents talk to their kids about the dangers and the harms of using, you've just heard from Dr. Brown what those are, but also set clear rules. And what I mean is, I don't want you to use, and provide consequences if they do. It really affects behavior. So here's a classic example. When your son or daughter was 2, and you were walking on a sidewalk, let's say on a really busy street, maybe it was even Main Street, and you were holding your child's hand, and maybe you let go of the hand for a minute to get a tissue and blow your nose. If your toddler let go of your hand and stepped off the sidewalk and started running into Main Street, what did you do as a mom or dad? You immediately did what?
Scream.
Scream. And what did you scream?
Their name.
Okay. Get back here, Emma, right now. Don't you ever drop my hand, and don't you ever go into the road. Don't you ever step off the sidewalk. And that's why you're here tonight, because your children are older than 2, okay? They got the clear message that it's really not okay to let go of your hand walking down a sidewalk on Main Street and go into busy street. We have to do the same thing when it comes to whether it's vaping, alcohol, or any other drug or unhealthy behavior. You have to make it really clear to them why it's not healthy, and you have to provide clear rules and a consequence. A consequence for that 2-year-old might be, you are going to have time out when we get home, or you're not going to have that ice cream that we were going to get, down at the store, or whatever it was. But your child absolutely knew that it was not okay to go into Main Street. So we have to do the same thing. I'm going to talk to you tonight about how to talk to your children about substances and what kind of consequences to provide. Okay. So this is just a graph of marijuana use, monthly marijuana use, and that's considered marijuana use in the last 30 days by high school seniors. And what you can see on the left side of the screen is 1975, on the right side of the screen, 2018. The new numbers will be out next month. They always come out in December. This is the largest national survey of middle school and high school drug use in the United States. It's called Monitoring the Future. And the point of this slide is just to show you that the red line, which is when they ask, and this is high school seniors, 12th graders, just to make the point, how easy is it for you to get marijuana? That line hasn't really varied very much, in 40 years. But look at the blue and green line, and those lines are almost inverse. And what you can see is that the year that the greatest number of high school seniors were using marijuana, which was 1978-79, was the year that the fewest number of high school seniors thought it was risky. And the year that the lowest number of high school seniors were using was the year when the greatest number thought it was risky. What everyone is so upset about right now is look at 15 to 8, well really, 11 to 18, the blue and green line. And what you see is that perception of risk is rapidly declining. Use hasn't gone up dramatically. This is 30-day use. But what's really changed is heavy use of marijuana. So using more than twice a week among high school seniors. That's what's gone up dramatically, not use at all. But the point of this is that kids are smart, and if they know that something is really dangerous for them, and they know that you're going to provide consequences if they use it because it's important to you, they're much less likely to use that substance. That's 40 years of data, and that's why parent education is so important. So I just want to give you some important numbers, and this one has just been the most enduring and most serious. You may think that it's okay for your son or daughter to eventually have alcohol before they're 21, and that's your family value. But clearly you can see that if you can delay the onset of use even 2 years, from 15 to 17, look how you reduce the rate of alcoholism. Dr. Brown showed you about the brain and how the brain is more receptive, if you will, in a negative way to nicotine. It's the same thing with alcohol and most of the other drugs. So really making it clear, absolutely no use under any circumstances before 15. Even waiting till 17, look at the change. So the older they are when they start, the less likely they are to use. Obviously, no one should be using under 21, just in terms of brain development and healthy social and emotional functioning. But even if that may not be your family value, the idea is to delay onset as long as possible. The other thing is, most of us have alcoholism or some other form of addiction in our family. And just like heart disease and allergies and other kinds of things, for those of us that do have alcoholism in our family, our kids are particularly vulnerable. They're at a greater risk because of genetic predisposition. And we can talk about that a little bit later also. Okay. Same thing with marijuana. The research is really clear that when adolescents or anybody, because unfortunately children are using THC also, that when people use under the age of 18, they are much more likely to develop a marijuana use disorder than adults. So when adults say, I don't have a problem with marijuana, well, that's great. But that doesn't mean it's okay for the child because the risks are just so much greater. All right, so skills and what to do. All right, so very specifically. Parents can change their behavior and their attitude on any given day. So it doesn't matter what you've said or done previously. It is absolutely fine to say, and I did this all the time with my children, you know, I read a new study today, and even though I said that you didn't have to wear sunscreen when it was cloudy, just giving you an old example of a myth, I just read that now I know you're just as vulnerable to have sun damage on a cloudy day as a sunny day. New study, therefore you have to wear sunscreen even though it's cloudy. That's just a quick example. So you might have let your child sip your alcohol, try marijuana, use a vape device, whatever, but you can say, I went to a lecture, I read a study, I saw a news article, I heard a news report, and we're changing our behavior. You're the parent, that's right. Think about how we've changed behavior over the years from the way many of us grew up. Some of us grew up skiing without helmets. Now you go to a ski area, almost everybody has a helmet. Some of us are old enough we didn't wear seatbelts, but now we wear seatbelts. Some of us didn't wear sunscreen, and now we put sunscreen on our children. So it's not too late to change your mind. The other thing is don't fall into the trap of letting your child compare their behavior to your behavior. You tell me not to drink, you drink. Or you tell me not to use marijuana, you use marijuana. There's a big difference. Is it okay for you to occasionally have a cup of coffee, assuming you don't have any problems where you can't have caffeine? Would we all agree that an adult, everyone here tonight, could occasionally have some coffee? Right. Would it be okay for a 2-month-old to have coffee in their baby bottle if they're having bottles? You're smiling like that's the most ridiculous thing you've ever heard. Why? Well, because your body is different. And you can say the same thing to your teenager, that your body is affected by chemicals in a different way than a young person's body is. Those of you that have middle school age children, a very simple example. And I'm just going to pick up some of the things that are right here. Let's pretend that this is a clear cylinder, okay? And then let's pretend you have a smaller clear cylinder. We don't have exact examples. Say, let's pretend this is you, the 7th grader. Let's pretend this is me, the adult. And these are both filled with just water. And we're going to put 1 drop of blue food coloring in both. Which will be a deeper blue? The small one. So that's just a very simple example of how the same drop of food coloring can make a real difference in a small body than a big body. But why? Again, Dr. Brown talked about the brain, but when you give kids information about why something's not good for them, I find the more specific you can be, the better. Does anybody have an Apple phone charger cord, like in their bag or on them or something? If you do, just take it out. I'm trying to demonstrate something for 1 minute. Perfect. So the myelin sheath covers the nerves, and that's usually not closed until somebody is 18 years old. So you can actually say to your teenagers, especially if they've taken biology, okay, this is a phone charger cord. If we dip this in water, it's going to be okay, assuming that this is all sealed and everything. But if this had nicks in it and we put it in water, what would happen to the phone charger cord? It would be damaged, right? So your myelin sheath isn't closed. How many nerves are in your body? I don't know the number, but a lot. So the more exposure to toxic substances, such as alcohol or THC oil or anything else, the more damage that's going to occur. That's just, and thank you very much, able to do it later. You've all been reading about the fraternity hazing and the deaths that have occurred on college campuses just in this last week. So why do freshmen go to college and drink so much that it causes alcohol poisoning? Because many of them have never developed the social skills in high school that they need to go up and talk to somebody. One of Danielle's colleagues, different school, told an amazing story I just want you to think about for a second. She saw Matt staring at Emma in a high school cafeteria. And she knew Matt. She went up to Matt and said, Matt, I see you staring at Emma. What's going on? And Matt said, oh, I think Emma's really hot. So our counselor said, well, why don't you go talk to her? He said, I wouldn't know what to say, and besides, she would never talk to me. So our counselor said, well, why don't you come in and we can talk about some ways to start a conversation. And he said, well, maybe I'll come in on Monday. This was on a Friday. Monday morning, our counselor walks in the school, and there's Matt and Emma holding hands, walking hand in hand down the hall with love in their eyes. So our counselor said to Matt, what did you say to Emma? Because it's obvious that you are going out. And he said, I didn't say anything. We were hanging out, we got wasted, we hooked up, and now we're going out. And the point of that story is getting wasted and hooking up has become the new hello. That you need to teach your kids how to start a conversation, how to end a conversation, things that we take for granted that somebody would know how to do. So a very practical thing is you live in the Irvington School District. Make sure your children have a chance to have exposure and interaction with kids who don't live in the Irvington School District, so they can try out new skills with different people. So if something didn't work here, maybe they can try it out because they're taking, I'm just gonna make this up, skating lessons in Elmsford, or they're taking some other kind of lesson in Tarrytown. Make sure they're exposed to different people and they're not with the same kids day after day after day, including all summer and all vacation. How to ask them questions on how was their day. This is how a normal conversation goes. Hi honey, how was your day? Fine. What'd you do? Nothing. Okay, right? Okay. Well, tell me about it. I don't want to talk. Can I go to my room? Well, honey, I'd really like to hear about your day. What don't you understand about that I don't want to talk to you right now? Okay. I don't need to have your attitude right now. Well, I've told you I don't want to talk, and you keep pressing. You see where this is going? Okay, this is not a helpful interaction. So how do you talk to your teenager about, I want to know how your day was. You might say, on a scale of 0 to 10, how was your day? Just give you a number, 5. Okay, well, what happened today that made it a 5 instead of a 2? Well, I did okay in my English test, and at lunchtime, I had a really fun time. I was sitting with so-and-so, whatever, right? Okay, so what kept it from being a 7? Well, I didn't do so well on the math test. You see the difference? Okay, really specific, and at least you get a reading on how your child is doing. That's just the beginning of communication. But it's not just about academics. It's about parties, it's about weekends, it's about being bored. So what you want to do is not just find out how was your day, okay, at school, but on Saturday evening or Saturday afternoon, whatever, say, how was your day today? What did you do? And you can use the same number schedule also, and talk about it. I have refusal skills. This is about refusing drug-taking behavior or alcohol use behavior or vaping behavior, but could also be refusing a sexual encounter or anything else that would be a risky behavior. What you want to do is help your adolescent know how to maintain the relationship, but refuse the unhealthy behavior. And you're probably thinking, why would I want my child to hang out with somebody who wants them to do something unhealthy? Because they really care about that person. So again, I'm going to be just a quick typical junior in high school, and I've had a crush on Matt ever since I got to high school. He's now a freshman at college. He's home for Thanksgiving vacation. We're at the gas station getting gas in our car, and oh my goodness, there's Matt. And he looks at me and he goes, Ellen, right? You're Ellen Morehouse. And I think, oh my God, he knows my name. Guys, you have to kind of go with me on this one. This is sometimes how it works. And yeah, I'm Ellen Morehouse. Oh, well, I'm Nat Smith, and I go to college up in Boston, and I'm home for vacation, and some of us are going to be hanging out Wednesday night, the night before Thanksgiving, one of the most dangerous nights of the year for high school students. How about coming over and hanging out tonight? Well, what is she going to say? And he might say, and I brought some really good stuff back with me. It's not like the junk we have here in Irvington. Okay. This is your daughter who never got high in her life. Okay. What is she going to do? She wants to go out to the party because she wants to be with Matt. So what can she do? So this is about teaching kids refusal skills, maintaining a relationship, but keeping it. So it might be, thanks so much, for inviting me to hang out with you. But you know what? I can't really go out Wednesday night. We're getting up early to go to Grandma's house tomorrow. We're having all these people over, and I promised my parents I'd help clean that. Whatever the excuses. However, I would love to hang out some other time. So in other words, she's complimenting the person and not saying, what do you mean offering me, drugs, whatever. So I thank the person, but I've also given, explained the consequence why I can't do it right now. I've offered an alternative. But if someone keeps pressing, someone has to learn to leave in a way that doesn't offend. And that might be an excuse like, oh, you know, I've got to go, I can't, you know, talk to you more. Like maybe, you know, you can text me, you know, later in the day or tonight or something else, but I've got to go right now. So what you need to do is have a code with your child, and that's what I call the escape code. So if they're in a situation where they're uncomfortable, someone wants them to do something they don't want to do, they've tried to give an excuse not to do it, but now they're really feeling pressured, can they text you or call you with a code? And it might be like, Dad, I'm really sorry, I forgot to feed the dog. Now, obviously, they can't use that excuse if they don't have a dog, okay? And what that means is, I need for you to come and get me right now, or I need to get out of the situation. So what you don't want to do is say, where can I pick you up? Because they're not going to say, well, I'm by the reservoir, because they don't want you to come with a flashlight like, Emma, I'm here, you know, where are you? And see everyone else. So instead, it's where can you meet me, because I want to pick you up, and when can you be there, and it better be soon. And it might be, okay, I'll walk to so-and-so and I'll meet you there. And that's the code. Now, what happens if you're in Manhattan for an event and it's a Saturday night and you can't be there? There has to be a backup person who is available to pick your son or daughter up on a Saturday night. So these are just some really specific strategies. The bottom line is health and safety should be your guiding principle in raising kids to be as substance-free as possible. And the bottom line is you can say to your son or daughter, you know, ever since you were little, your mom and I did everything we could to keep you safe and healthy. We made sure you had your vaccinations. We took you to the pediatrician, you know, when you were sick. We made sure you weren't too cold or, you know, you weren't too hot. And just because you're 17 and 5'9", I'm not going to stop loving you and caring about your health and safety. And that's why I don't want you to use. And if you continue to use, I'm going to take away your cell phone. I'm going to have consequences that are immediate and that you can live with. Grounding your child for the rest of the year is something you can't live with, okay? Because you're not going to be in your house every Friday and Saturday night. So have specific consequences. I have like 20 tips to help keep your child safe. And on the other side are intervention tips for if they start to experiment with chemicals or if they start to have a problem. But as with any other health and safety problem, if your child kept coughing and had a fever, okay, you would bring them to the pediatrician, even though your child said, Mom, Dad, I'm really okay. You'd say, you've been, you know, coughing for a week, you've had a fever for a week, we're going to the doctor. And when the son or daughter says, no, we're not, you say, oh, yes, you are. Get in the car right now, and there would be a consequence, and they go. We have to do the same thing. If they start to develop a problem, you have to make it really clear that you have to bring them for some help. I'm just about out of time, and I want to leave some time for questions, so thank you very much. That's it. Questions for Dr. Brown or Danielle or me?
I have a question. This is like awesome information. It scares the crap out of me. Sorry, but and I know that they're getting kids in school. Like, is the school talking to the kids? I know I get no information. I'm sorry.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Are the kids getting, like, especially the medical information, like as in an assembly? I know that's a lot of information for them, but in a smaller, shorter way.
I'll say, make sure, read the e-blasts each week. I know I've been putting out, and I've been contributing to the e-blasts every week, so it'll keep you updated on the information I'm doing at the high school.
Yes.
For the Bulldog Bark, I put in nearly not every single week, but I know the e-blast I do every week to keep you updated on what I'm doing. We have Great American Smokeout is tomorrow, and for all through November, we've been doing like announcements, giving out information to students, letting them know about Great American Smokeout coming up. all this week, giving out announcements, letting them know about the impact of vaping, impact of nicotine, how addictive it is, letting students know that if they're addicted to nicotine, to think about perhaps making Great American Smoke Out, a time to quit. All throughout the year, they get information, different focuses each month on either alcohol, other substances. So, and they do, that's what I'm doing as a student assistance counselor in collaboration with the Positive Impacts Club. Students have information through their health classes. We also have a great speaker. Well, we had someone come yesterday speaking to students regarding anxiety. But we have also a very dynamic, wonderful speaker next week coming that Irvington IASC is bringing to us, Ty Sells. He's wonderful. And he'll be speaking with students as well.
And if
Thank
some
you,
of you have,
Tommy.
if some of you have older students, it'll be similar last year to Dr. Stephen Dewey. Some of you may have attended that presentation. But simultaneously, the students got a very small classroom, interactive type of experience, and it was every student within the building. So we'll be following that same model to have Ty Sells come in, and he is specifically through the gym class. It's just a one day, so every student will get it at their normally scheduled gym class. But his presentation is geared towards marijuana and vaping use in particular. That's one of the, every other year we survey the students to kind of guide our programming and kind of where we want to dedicate our resources, and that is definitely one of the areas where we see some challenges with the students. So we wanted to bring him in to address that. And we will be sending you guys, I don't know if you remember from last year with the speaker series, they came to both students and parents, a series of conversation starters. So points that you can use to have a dialogue with your students specifically about something that was presented by that speaker. So we'll be providing that for Ty Sells as well. So he's very engaging. I'm sure the kids will have plenty to say even without any conversation starters, but definitely be on the lookout for that.
Can I just go, I haven't seen her freshman, just so you guys know that I think that, in my opinion, from what I've heard, having it in the gym classes is great because they don't cut their gym classes, but sometimes the older ones, when there's an assembly, and it's, it's piggybacking next to like their lunch, I say the seniors don't always go to the assemblies. They were like, who's taking attendance? So they might do a double lunch and go do some fun because, they're seniors. So I think they might be missing out on some of the content. So the smaller groups, I think it works better if they're not going to cut their gym most of them are not going to cut their gym classes. But on top of that, I think recently the feedback I'm hearing about various forms of vaping is that a lot of them are getting really freaked out by the vaping issues. And I'm hearing that a lot of them are stopping or trying to stop. So I don't know if it's like striking while the iron is hot of fear, and it's horrible, but I think it's also good in a way. So I just wanted to put that up there.
I know I've been trying to getting out information and letting them know, like updated numbers. CDC gives out new numbers each Wednesday. So I've been having announcements through November as far as the new numbers, stats related.
Information given to
That's done through the announcements in the morning. So, so I'm giving out information. I know this is my first year here at Irvington High School, but my understanding is that IASC has a wonderful speaker series arranged each year. So they get information through speakers as well, through the health classes. So different.
Yeah, I just feel like that information, like the medical information is, or just that, and I don't know if they're getting it, like, yes, they're getting it, but if they have to go find it, they're not in the visual. And I think your presentation was more for parents, like, you would lose a lot of kids and some of that, but anything that's gonna scare them like that is, I could talk about it all day, and I do, but they're like,
Yeah.
we don't want to do.
So just one thing to add on the back of that. The deaths, unfortunately, tragic as they are, have a beneficial side effect. I do think they have started to scare some of the kids. So building on that is fantastic. I think though, think further forward, there's a bunch of research being done about what is causing these deaths. And can you talk to us about how you're thinking about messaging the outcomes of that? Because they're going to find a narrow cause in some rooms about inhibitory in some devices. Oh, so others are great. Others are fine. How are you thinking about messaging, the research part and the real cause of these deaths?
It's a great question. So risk messaging is a lot of what we do. How you say it can have tremendous implications. So, I presented from the CDC report because everyone's like, oh, we know what it is, it's vitamin A, and this product doesn't have vitamin A, or it's all the THC products.
Yeah.
And it's not true. And so the message is, and New York State has consistently put this out, all public health agencies, it's just the fact being receptive to that. Because if you say you have a potential culprit, kids are like, okay, that's not culprit, that's all it could be, that's not what I'm using. So saying that all products are not safe, this could happen to you. They're doing research into this to figure it out more, but it's way bigger than that, and there's a lot more information than we don't know. So when you think about risk messaging, it's thinking about how do you say it so that someone will listen, and the kids who you're saying it to, as Ellen alluded to myself, kids are very concrete. So they hear something and they hold on to what they say. So saying it in a way of, I don't say it's less harmful than cigarettes, even though it may be less harmful, it's still extremely harmful. And so using the word less harmful implies safe. So you have to say it's not safe. And just so the way you say something is really important. So I think you bring up a critical point. I think more than ever, we've been doing our legislation and advocacy in light of these acute effects. Like since July, if you look at how much legislation is either being proposed or being passed, research that is coming out on e-cigarettes, it's a huge spike than it ever was in the past 10 years because it's now an acute problem. And, and so we don't want people to back off and say, it's all related to breathing to THC and black market products because that's, we don't know if that's true. And regardless, there's a huge epidemic, so we don't want to ignore that. But yes, right.
And I just want to add one thing. So education is necessary, but it's not sufficient. That education alone doesn't change behavior. I think we all know that we're all supposed to get 30 minutes of exercise every day to prevent all kinds of diseases. And I'm willing to bet not everyone here gets 30 minutes of exercise every day, even though we know that information. So giving kids skills. So what I tried to show you is what can they say in that situation? What can I do? How do I start a conversation? To me, that's just as important as scaring them and giving them the information. Give them the skills so they won't need to use that.
It's a very, very hard topic to broach. Prevention is key, and prevention is so hard. Treating, when a kid comes in the hospital with a lung disease, I can give them the stories, I can treat them and get them better, but how do I prevent everyone from starting? So that's really the key. But it's prevention. Nicotine addiction is a preventable disease, and we always say that as pediatricians, we hand off to adult counterparts a huge burden of disease that we just need to prevent in the first place. But, prevention is hard, and legislation, unfortunately, isn't working with us to do that, and because of these loopholes, it's skyrocketing. So we just don't want to make the same mistakes that we made with cigarettes, and so that's really the goal, is to not go backwards. We made tremendous progress.
Can I say, if you could clarify, I wasn't at the last presentation a couple weeks ago, but I heard secondhand something that you had said possibly, which was, unlike smoking and the effects once you stop smoking, your lungs could sort of, repair themselves, or you stop smoking and it might take X amount of years for your lungs to kind of repair. But with vaping, because of the heavy metals, so you're inhaling the heavy metals, and then these things kind of deposit in your lungs, and there's no real pathway for them to,
Well, it can
like you
promote,
said, they're not self-cleaning, like the lungs
Right.
are not meant to
Yeah.
sort of, so
I mean,
that's something that I sort of repeated something like that at home, just to say that, it's not just nicotine or the fruit you're
Yeah.
ingesting, but these heavy metals are sitting there deposited, and, you may not get them out once they're in there.
Yeah.
Sort of like his big eyes were looking at me like, ooh. You know? But I mean, if this were true, this would be,
So there's a lot of lung diseases that are related to inhalation of particulate matter, and your lungs have a sophisticated immune system within them, where you can promote an inflammatory response with too much inflammation can be a bad thing and become self-destructive or destructive, and then it all has to be regulated. But essentially, your lungs will try their hardest to clear everything out, because the lungs have one goal. They want to get well, they have many goals, but they want to get oxygen into the bloodstream. That's like the end all. That's what the lungs do. So you can have oxygen-rich blood for the heart to pump. So your lungs will do that at all costs, and will try to clear things away, but when that goes awry, and then the deposit of these chemicals and metals can be responsible for diseases. It can trigger other inflammatory cascades within your body and be responsible for diseases. One of the ones we worry about the most are development of certain cancers, autoimmune diseases. These are all linked to diseases that come. So it's not just like a physical, like when you think of the concept of what happens when you inhale, all these different components to your lungs. It's more of a systemic response because it gets into your bloodstream, and then all your organs see it because all the oxygenated blood from the lungs goes into the whole body. And then what does that cause? And diseases, environmental exposures are largely responsible for multiple diseases. So when I think about vaping, it's an environmental exposure, but it's a preventable one. It's not like I live near a highway and so I'm always breathing in a lot of diesel fuels, but this is my social situation, this is where I live. This is a modifiable environmental exposure. So that's how I think of it. But so it's not as concrete, or I guess the concept is not just that it's a metal sitting there and then it's in an area that's getting infected. It's more the inflammatory cascade and how your body metabolizes and tries to clear it, and that promotes the problems. Does that make sense?
Is it a true statement to say that the lungs can't, and the body, to your point, don't recover from issues associated with vaping?
Yeah. Well, it's hard for me to say for 100% because we don't really know. We don't have enough
We don't
long-term
have time
observational studies, exactly, to really know what the recovery period is. I can tell you that children's lungs are quite resilient, but I don't know enough about if they recover. With the disease bronchiolitis obliterans from the aerosolized acetyl, that's an irreversible disease. So again, there's so many factors and different chemicals and toxins that are causing the lung disease that we're seeing, different from conventional cigarettes. There's some repeat offenders, but there's some new ones. And so it's hard to say with certainty. Kids, but if you stop it, and when you think about exposures, it's also dose related. So dose is related to frequency. So how often are you taking it, and how long are you doing it for? So what's the dose that they're doing? And that also informs the health effect as well. So it's so complex. But prevention, it means no exposure, it means potential for disease is none. Exposure means potential for disease is very vast, and so prevention is key.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. Thank you so much. It is being recorded, or has been recorded, so please feel free to share. It will be up on our website, and the district will be sharing that as well, so spread the word. And then if you're not already on our mailing list, please get on it. We send out notices regularly, not just about speakers and presenters that we're hosting, but also locally. So it's a pretty wide community of coalitions that are really trying to work on a lot of the same issues. So we encourage you to get to where you can. And then maybe most importantly, we're always looking to support our young people in any initiatives that they feel are important, particularly if it relates directly to prevention. We do have a pretty solid group of students that have worked on a couple different things. I don't know if you guys remember, there was a dodgeball tournament a couple of years back, and it was a kind of a fun way to deliver information. If you were there, they shared statistics while they were playing dodgeball. The kids really enjoyed it. We have another group of students that are planning something called a Better High Day that they're hoping to coordinate with the river towns to do something hyper-local where a lot of the students know each other from the neighboring districts, and it will be kind of a celebration of different ways to have a good time. So please encourage your students to get involved, get on our mailing list, and if you have any suggestions, we definitely want to hear from you as a coalition. The parents are the ones that are really kind of the boots on the ground, so please share any information you have, any issues that you feel we can be addressing better, or any ideas that you have for reaching our students and parents in the community. So thank you again.